Russia's military, once an emblem of national pride and power, is now facing an enormous crisis. Fewer and fewer young Russians are willing to join. Despite the government's aggressive recruitment strategies, promises of financial benefits, and patriotic appeals, the military is struggling to attract new recruits. So, what has led to this dramatic shift? Let's explore the reasons in detail. Historically, military service in Russia was not just an obligation. It was seen as a point of honor, especially during the Soviet era. Back then, military conscription was deeply ingrained in the culture, and being a soldier carried social prestige. During the Cold War, the USSR's vast military was not only a source of national pride, but a critical element of its global superpower status. For young men, serving the state in the armed forces meant proving loyalty, strength, and manhood. However, as the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 1990s, that image began to fade. Russia's post-Soviet military struggled with funding cuts, morale problems, and international isolation. Fast forward to today, and those challenges have only grown more complex. Let's begin with the most obvious and immediate cause of disillusionment: the war in Ukraine. The invasion of Ukraine in 2022 began as a special military operation, with promises of swift victory. What was anticipated to be a short campaign has turned into a drawn-out conflict, characterized by heavy casualties, logistical failures, and international condemnation. Young Russians are seeing firsthand what this war has cost their country. Official numbers on troop losses are kept under tight wraps, but independent reports estimate tens of thousands of Russian soldiers have died or been severely wounded. This stark reality makes military service seem far more dangerous and unpredictable than in previous years. For young people, the prospect of being deployed to Ukraine has become a significant deterrent. They know that enlistment likely means fighting in a war many don't agree with. Even though state-controlled media attempts to justify the war as necessary for Russia's security, there's growing skepticism. With access to global news sources via the internet and social media, young Russians are exposed to stories that contradict the official narrative. They hear the stories of soldiers returning home in body bags, of poorly equipped troops being sent to the front lines with outdated weapons, and of veterans with untreated injuries and psychological scars. This brings us to another critical factor: the trauma associated with military service. Many soldiers return from the battlefield suffering from PTSD and other mental health issues. Unlike Western countries, where there are often established support systems for veterans, Russia lacks sufficient mental health resources for its soldiers. Veterans of the Afghan War in the 1980s, the Chechen Wars in the 1990s and early 2000s, and now the war in Ukraine often feel abandoned by the state. For young people witnessing this, the psychological toll of military service is becoming as concerning as the physical dangers. This also ties into Russia's conscription system. Conscription has long been a part of Russian life, with young men required to serve for 1 year in the military. But in recent years, this has become increasingly unpopular. Today's youth, especially those in urban centers like Moscow and St. Petersburg, see conscription not as a patriotic duty, but as an outdated practice that threatens their personal freedom. Many try to find ways out, whether by obtaining medical exemptions, extending their education, or even leaving the country. During the early stages of the war in Ukraine, thousands of young men fled Russia to avoid the draft, choosing exile over being forced into a war they don't believe in. The Russian government has attempted to make military service more appealing by offering higher wages, bonuses, and other incentives, but these efforts are failing. The economy, strained by international sanctions, has led to high inflation and a rising cost of living. While military salaries might look attractive on paper, they don't stretch as far as they used to. Moreover, the unpredictable nature of pay and the risk of not receiving promised benefits make the prospect even less appealing. In short, even with financial incentives, many young Russians don't see military service as a stable or lucrative career path. But economics isn't the only issue. Let's talk about the conditions within the military itself. Soldiers often live in overcrowded, poorly maintained barracks, with substandard food and outdated equipment. This is a far cry from the image of a modern, well-equipped military that Russia tries to project. Conscripts and contract soldiers alike face harsh conditions, low morale, and a lack of adequate support. Abuse within the ranks, known as dedovshchina, has also been a persistent issue. This refers to the hazing and bullying of younger soldiers by more experienced ones, a practice that has existed for decades in the Russian military. Though officially condemned, it continues to plague the armed forces and is another factor driving potential recruits away. Another aspect to consider is the broader political climate in Russia. The country has become increasingly authoritarian under President Vladimir Putin's rule, with crackdowns on dissent and a tightening grip on public discourse. Young Russians who grew up in a more connected, globalized world are questioning the state's actions more than previous generations did. They see the war in Ukraine as part of a broader struggle between Russia's old guard clinging to power and a future that could involve more freedom and integration with the rest of the world. Social media has played a massive role in shaping these attitudes. Platforms like Telegram, VKontakte, and even Instagram before it was restricted provide spaces where young people can discuss politics, share alternative viewpoints, and connect with others who feel similarly disillusioned with the state. The rise of opposition movements, like those spearheaded by figures such as Alexei Navalny, has also influenced younger Russians. Even if they don't actively protest, they are more critical of the government than the older generation. This critical mindset naturally extends to their view of military service. International comparisons can also help us understand why Russian youth are turning away from the military. In many other countries, such as the US, Canada, or European nations, military service is voluntary and comes with numerous benefits, including education, healthcare, and stable career paths. In contrast, Russia's military service is often compulsory, with limited perks and a high risk of deployment to dangerous conflicts. When young Russians see their counterparts in other nations choosing careers with more freedom and safety, it's no wonder they're reluctant to join the military. The international isolation that Russia faces due to its actions in Ukraine has also played a significant role in the decline of military interest. The sanctions imposed by Western countries have not only crippled the economy, but have also impacted the military's operational capabilities. Without access to modern technology and resources, Russia's military is becoming increasingly outdated. This impacts everything from the quality of weapons to the effectiveness of training. Young people are well aware that they would be joining a military that's struggling to keep up with modern standards, further diminishing the appeal of enlistment. So, with all these factors combined, the risks of deployment to a deadly war, poor conditions, low morale, economic hardships, international isolation, and a growing distrust in the government. Why would anyone want to join the Russian military today? The challenges facing Russia's military recruitment efforts are immense and, at this point, seem insurmountable without significant reforms. Young people are making it clear that they don't want to be pawns in a geopolitical game or risk their lives for a cause they don't believe in. The government may continue to push its recruitment campaigns, but until the root issues are addressed, it's unlikely that the tide will turn. In conclusion, the Russian military is no longer the prestigious career path it once was. For most young Russians, the costs far outweigh the benefits. Until the government changes course, both in terms of its military policies and its treatment of recruits, the number of people willing to serve will continue to dwindle. This recruitment crisis poses a serious threat to the future of Russia's military strength, and it's a problem that won't be solved overnight.